Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Matt, I am the American-Canadian Gamer, and welcome to the second episode of the FNM Report. I'm still not entirely sure exactly what I want to do with this series, but I really do enjoy making these videos, so any feedback that you have would be greatly appreciated. So, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive in and talk about the deck that I took to Friday Night Magic this week, and it is basically a very slightly modified version of the Abzan Midrange deck that I showcased in last week's episode, and it is your basic run-of-the-mill Abzan Midrange. I run Fleece Main Lions, Anafenza, Den Protectors, Death Misraptors, and Siege Rhinos. I have a little bit of removal. I have a couple Elspeths, a couple Sorens, I have an Ajani, I have some Abzan Charms, Dramoka's Command, Hero's Downfall, Murderous Cut. Very basic when it comes to Abzan Midrange, because Abzan's in a very good place right now. Abzan Midrange especially, Abzan Control's really good, Abzan Aggro's really good right now with Hangerback Walker, and the Midrange is a version that I really enjoy playing, and mine is kind of slightly modified. I have cards like Bow of Nylea, and I have Ajani Mentor of Heroes, and I'm a little beefier than other midrange decks. I do pretty good against aggro, but I am really bad against control, especially Esper Control. Esper Control really tears me apart. Esper Dragons, more specifically, I should say. And also, up until recently, Constellation has been a big issue against my deck because they just get too big, too wide, and too quick, and Heroic rips through me like I'm nothing. But other than that, I do have a pretty good matchup against most decks, and even the decks that counter mine, I still have at least a fighting opportunity. I don't just go down immediately. I do have a chance still. So, let's just talk about a couple of the changes that I made from last week, and they're not very many. In the main board, I took out Nissa. Nissa wasn't doing anything for me, especially because I only have one of her. By the time I even saw her, like in the late game, it was already in the point where either I was so behind I wasn't coming back, or I was so far ahead where I didn't even need to play her. So I took her out of the main board and I replaced her with Dragonlord Dramoka. I took Dramoka out of my sideboard and put her in the main board in Nissa's place, and she performed much better. She's in the same mana slot as Elspeth, so I have 3 6-mana bombs to play in the late game, and she's a big threat that needs to be answered. She is a huge, uncounterable, flying lifelink. She goes over the top of other mid-range decks. She gets... what's it called? She's a magnet for removal. She prevents opponents from playing cards and spells on my turn so that I can attack without worrying about enemies playing combat tricks, and she helps me stabilize, and she's just a big threat that needs to be removed, and she's a very good card, and I did see her a couple of times, and she did a couple really good things for me. She was never really a win more card. She was always a I'm going to take the lead from this point card as opposed to Nissa. So I was very happy to put her in the main board. And then as far as other changes go, is really just my sideboard. My sideboard is a little too geared towards aggro, I think. And so I took out one of the Feed the Clans because I had 3, which is way too many in hindsight. But I opened a second Tragic Arrogance after last week's FNM. So now I have 2 Tragic Arrogances in my sideboard, 2 Feed the Clans, and I replaced one of the Naturalizes with a Back to Nature to help handle Constellation decks. And with Den Protector and stuff, I'll have plenty of ways to deal with enchantments and big enchantment-based decks. And I don't run very many enchantments. I have a Banishing Light, a Bow of Nylea, and a Whip of Erebos. If I'm ever in a position where I need to play a Back to Nature, I will gladly sacrifice one of those cards to be able to wipe out a Constellation deck. And that's the only time I would bring it in, so... that's the only real changes that we saw. Still pretty basic, pretty regular, pretty expected, but still very good and very viable. So let's go ahead and talk about the games that we played. We actually had some people show up, more people than usual, and we ended up going into 4 rounds. And I went 3-1. I think I did pretty well. Game 1 was just handed to me in terms of victory because I went up against a guy. He was very new to the game, didn't know what he was doing. He had bought a dual deck, and he didn't understand the concept of standard, modern, legacy, vintage, all that other stuff. And so he thought he could play the dual deck in the event, and he couldn't, so he automatically forfeited the match against me. But we went up and we talked to the store owners, and you know, they let him use an event deck for the rest of the game, so that people were teaching him how to play and stuff. So I mean, he was new. It was an honest mistake. He didn't do very well. He didn't place or anything, but he still got to play and he got to learn the concept. So I was glad to see him stick around. He didn't just leave. So yeah, that was an easy win for me, but I didn't garner any more points off of him because he didn't go on to do anything else. So that was round 1. That was game 1. That was pretty much in the bag for obvious reasons. Now, the second round was the one that I was fearing the most, and that was Esper Dragon Control. And it's a guy that I play against pretty regularly there. I usually get a match against him all the time. We always have really good matches. And his Esper control deck always walks over my Abzan deck. It always has, it always will, and it did the same thing here. Game 1, he had everything that he needed. Always had the counter spells, he always had the removal, and he was just one step ahead of me the entire game, and there wasn't really anything I could do about it whatsoever. And Game 2, I got mana screwed. I was stuck on 3 land pretty much the entire game. I had cards in my hand. I got to my second land, I went to play a Fleecemane Lion, and he countered it with a Silumgar Scorn, did not reveal a dragon, just so he could say, hey, unless you pay 1, and it grinned at me with that face of his. So that was what he did the entire game, basically. Then I got to a third land, Anafenza, same thing, and then I was stuck on 3 land forever. By the time I drew a 4th land, it was a tap land, so I was way behind, and he just walked all over me from that point on. So that was a 2-0 against me. Esper Dragons doing its thing. Esper Control does always walk all over my Abzan deck. There's really no other way to put it. The only thing that would really allow me to beat his deck is more speed, and I don't have the speed to be able to do that. I'm not an aggressive deck. And so, for the moment, it's basically a hard counter against my deck, and I'm okay with that because your deck is never going to be 100% good in every single situation. Now, Game 3, round 3, I went up against another control deck, but this time it was Sultai Control, and this one was a pretty good matchup. It felt pretty even. It felt a little tilted in his favor, but at the same time, my deck is rather resilient against, like, 1-for-1 removals and stuff. And Game 1 was a very control-favored matchup. He basically went in, got rid of all my stuff, and I got a Sorin on board, or wasn't it a Johnny? I got one of my Planeswalkers on board. It was probably Elspeth. No, it was Elspeth. I got Elspeth on board. Then he played Garrick, the corrupted Garrick, the black-green one, plussed him, killed my Elspeth, and then, like, the next turn or a turn later, he played Ugin and got rid of all my other stuff, and I basically just scooped. He has an Ugin on board and an Garrick on board, uncontested. I am not coming back from that, so I just scooped and said, let's go to Game 2. And in Game 2, he ended up becoming land screwed. He decided to keep his opening hand because he did have a temple, he had a Scryland, and he had like 3 Thoughtseizes, which he played one after the other, but he just was not drawing answers. He was drawing land, so he wasn't having answers, and I just got too far ahead for him to come back, plain and simple. And then Game 3 was much more interesting. Game 3 was the one where there were dynamics happening. He attempted to Silumgar Command and kill my Deathmist Raptor, and so I played a Dramoka's Command and put a counter on it so it survived, and we ended up going later into the game to where I had I had a Rhino on board, a Fleecemane Lion, and I had Sorin Solemn Visitor. He destroyed my Rhino because my Fleecemane Lion was monstrous, and then he played Dragon Lord Silumgar and took my Sorin from me. Now, Sorin was at 6 counters when he took it, and because of his Thoughtseizes, he knew that I had an Elspeth in hand, but at the same time, he was at 1 life. He was in a very hard predicament, because even if I just top-decked a Siege Rhino, unless he had a counter, which he didn't because he was tapped out for the Dragonlord Silumgar, I just win. So he basically took a gamble and decided to plus Sorin and get the lifelink to prevent me from attacking into him because he would gain life. Even though my Fleecemane Lion is indestructible, I would not die to his Silumgar, but I would give him 4 life. So he ticked up my Sorin, so Sorin got 7 loyalty counters, and his Dragonlord Silumgar became a 4-power creature. I played Elspeth the next turn, negged Elspeth, which destroyed his Silumgar because he had made it 4 power with Sorin. I got my Sorin back, plus Sorin, swung for victory. That was Sultai Control. That was a pretty good matchup, pretty fun back and forth. I really learned that Languish isn't really a card that I should be nearly as scared of as I thought. Languish did not do very much. It is a 4-mana Wrath, but it's not like guaranteed destroys. It's really weird in how little it actually did against me. I can see it really wrecking some decks, but Languish isn't nearly as scary of a card as I once thought it was. It's really Crux of Fate is the Black Wrath that I fear more than Languish when it comes to that deck. Okay, now round 4 was kind of the weird one. I went up against a Jund Dragon deck, but it also seemed to splash white because he played a Windswept Heath. Now, I don't know if he played the Heath because he didn't have the wooded foothills or because he was splashing white for whatever reason. If he was splashing white, I did not see it. Now, this was also a ramp deck because he played Coursers of Kruphix and he also played Rattleclaw Mystics. And I didn't really get to see much out of this deck because game 1, I was very quick. I had my Fleecemane Lion into Anathenza, into Siege Rhino, into Sorin, and I stampeded all over him. I didn't really get to see anything. He didn't play any cards, and he didn't put any creatures on board. He didn't do anything. He wasn't missing land drops, but he didn't do anything. So that was game 1. Game number 2, we both mulliganed, and I kept a hand that had a Siege Rhino, a Dramoka's Command, and 4 land. That was my opening hand, and I thought, okay, well, I'll give it a shot because I'm not sure what he has. And we played our land. He ended up playing a Courser of Kruphix, and then I played a Rhino, and then he ended up playing a Rattleclaw and another Courser, and I would attack with the Rhino. Well, at one point, he decided to try to block with one of his Coursers, and he tried to use Draconic Roar on my Rhino before damage resolve so that he could kill my Rhino and also deal 3 damage to me, and he revealed Dragonlord Kolaghan when he did it. Well, I decided to play Dramoka's Command, made him sack an enchantment, and I prevented the damage. And I was hoping that he would miss that, and he would sack the wrong Courser, but he was proper, and he sacked the Courser that was blocking that would have died anyways. So I still trampled through for 4 damage, but I didn't get rid of both Coursers. And this continued on. I would attack, and then this would happen. I would attack and he would take damage, and we kind of just went through with this. Nothing really major happened. We didn't play any bigger cards. None of us dropped a Planeswalker, and he was stuck on that land the entire time. And then I drew a Den Protector. I put it face down when I was at 5 mana, and I attacked with the Rhino again. And he tried to, I was at a lot more than 5 mana because this was a couple turns later. But I attacked with the Rhino again, and he tried to do the same thing. Block with the Courser, Draconic Roar. I turned up the Den Protector, got Dramoka's Command back, and then put a counter on the Rhino and prevented the damage of the Draconic Roar. So again, trampled over the Courser and prevented all that damage, and then he didn't draw anything else, and he scooped. So that was it. I ended up going 3-1, but because of the way the Planeswalker points worked out, and because the fact that I went up against the guy that... In round 1, I went up against the guy that brought the wrong deck. I didn't get any points. I ended up 4th place. I probably could have gotten 3rd, but I did wind up in 4th place because a lot of people were 3-1. There was no undefeated. There are 4 people that were 3-1, and I was on the bottom of those 4 people. So that's how that worked out. What I really learned from this was that my Abzan midrange deck, it's good, but I think there are things that I need to do to fix it because all the decks I went up against, 2 of my major victories were against land screws. And I feel like if those decks hadn't missed their land drops, that it would have been a much closer and much more difficult match. So I'm going to completely break down my deck and build a whole new one for next FNM, because I actually think Abzan midrange, there's a lot of hate for it right now. A lot of people are actually really built against it, they have efficient removal like Hero's Downfall and other things, and they're just ready to take it out. So I want to try and build something different that people aren't really playing or haven't seen for next week. So that's what I'm going to be doing. So once again, I'm still not sure what I want to do with this FNM report, this whole series. I'm not sure what I want to do with it, where I want to take it. Maybe it's just going to end up being just like a little entertaining thing, or maybe I can get some kind of education and value out of it. We don't know. We don't know yet, but once again, your feedback is appreciated. So, as always, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. My name is Matt, and I'll see you next time.